Yeah, Phil, it's been a busy couple months, and I tell you, most recently, it's been a busy couple weeks. A couple things I wanted to talk about today were some of these newer developments. One is, a couple months ago, OSHA released a proposed rule, and granted, still got to go through the formal rulemaking process, and I think there's going to be some significant hurdles there. But there's a proposed rule on the table that essentially expands the ability for third parties to participate in OSHA inspections. Now, if you've ever gone through an OSHA inspection, one thing you know is you don't really get any notice of it. They just show up, the compliance officer waves his badge or her badge, and you got to make that determination. Well, are they coming in? Or are they not? They need a warrant. But now, under this new proposal, they changed the definition of who can be a participant in that. Usually it had to be an employee of the employer, a designated employee who was going to represent all the employers or all the employees there. Now it is essentially any third party. And this will speak close to Bert's heart as a labor lawyer, but that means union organizers. And if you've ever gone through a union organization
third party is code for union organizer.
It's a code for union orders. It can be code for anything you want, but I can tell you, in most of these spaces in which OSHA's inspecting, typically a manufacturing facility or a distribution center, you're going to have a segment of that workforce that's probably interested in having an organized workforce. So now organizers have an ability to come in, or may have that ability depending on where this rule goes. That also extends to whether they bring in a third-party safety engineer or a third-party, consultant. They want to come in and walk with OSHA and point out every single flaw that they see in that inspection. That opens up a whole can of worms.
Could that be a third-party lawyer?
It could. For instance, you got a workers' comp issue. The designated employee representative might be a plaintiff's lawyer or a work comp lawyer, and that is a can of worms that we don't want to open. It's already hard enough to deal with that.
Hey, Tom, while you're on this topic, let's take a look at our first slide here and see what you think about the results. Remember, the question was, how much do you believe union representation during OSHA inspections would impact your organization? And it looks to be a pretty good split between a lot or not at all. That's a pretty good split there, either a lot or not at all. But I think that kind of gives the mindset of where businesses are at, right? If I'm under the threat and I feel like union is a threat and have been fighting to stay in a union-free position, probably going to be a lot. If it's not something that's a threat to our workplace, I might say, well, probably not at all. Or if I'm in an office environment and I don't really think in that traditional way that we're confronted with as manufacturers, maybe not at all.
Yeah, and Phil, this is an interesting poll here because, like you said, it's a pretty good split. And I'd say that in environments that are already organized, where there's already union representation, sometimes those are hostile relationships, and sometimes they're not. So I've been in situations where there's no effect on it. In fact, the union works pretty cooperatively with the employer, and other situations where it's very opposite. In a situation under this new proposed rule, I think it's going to have a lot more influence on those inspections, because you're going to have parties who have an interest in organizing or have an interest in getting something from those employees that they're not already getting. So there's going to be more of an incentive there to push the envelope with the inspector. And I mean, this all comes down to whether the inspector allows it to happen. That's the sort of the rub and the wrinkle in this. It's all discretionary, which is why I think we're going to have some litigation over this rule if it ever goes into effect, and it's still in that comment period now. But this is one of those items that's certainly on the forefront of a safety lawyer's minds, because it's going to add a cook to the kitchen that's already crowded.
Yeah, that's a good way of saying it. Okay, Tom, what else we have?
Well, another sort of scary development, and I say that sort of ironically here, is that on Halloween, the National Labor Relations Board and OSHA issued a memo of understanding, basically saying, hey, we're going to work together now. And that's not to say they didn't before, but there's a real concerted effort here to do so. And particularly this applies to investigations that are going into whistleblower claims. Many of you may not be aware, but OSHA has jurisdiction to investigate whistleblower claims under a variety of statutes that aren't OSHA. So, for instance, Sarbanes-Oxley or the Clean Air Act, or if you're in a nuclear plant, the Energy Reorganization Act, or if you're an over-the-road trucker, the Surface Transportation Assistance Act. OSHA is responsible for investigating those. And now what the NLRB and OSHA are doing is saying, we're going to share information. If I'm investigating a whistleblower claim and I think there's an unfair labor practice, the OSHA investigator is going to refer them to the NLRB. And vice versa. If the NLRB is investigating an unfair labor practice and they see a safety violation or maybe a whistleblower issue, they're going to refer them to OSHA. And there's going to be some sharing of information. And that also includes information that employers provide during those processes. So if you're in an inspection or an investigation, you provide information, there's now a chance, a pretty good chance, that the NLRB might get that information and it might be shared with them. Again, the NLRB and OSHA, they're trying to come together here under the purpose of protecting workers' rights, but really this is going to put a real sort of handcuffs on employers, and it's going to make us very careful about what we're providing to OSHA, knowing that it might be relayed to another agency. So that's another unique development that, like I said, scary. It came out on Halloween, right?
How long that is scary for a Halloween development. How long do you think it will be before one agency or the other is like, stop sending me things? I have enough work to do. I don't need more work in OSHA because of the NLRB or in the EEOC because of the NLRB, whatever it might be. Sooner or later, one of these agencies is going to point at the other going, you're causing me more work.
That's right. And I can tell you, Phil, the OSHA investigators that I talk to, they're already overworked.
That's my point. I mean, that's my point. Yeah.
Yeah. And it wouldn't be surprised if they sort of say uncle at some point. Or the alternative, which may be scarier, is that the government's going to have to hire more investigators.
That could be it too. That could be it too.
But yeah, there's these are all the intentions might be to make things safer, make things more just, but there's a practical side of this that I'm not sure is going to be able to be carried out very efficiently.
Yeah. Well, one thing we know for sure is that we'll be sharing the information. It creates more risk, and we need to be more careful about what we're doing and what we're saying when we are in these environments. And the right person to give a call in that is you, Tom. I mean, you're going to help guide them through that, because it does become, troubled waters to navigate through. So
that's right.
It gets to be a little tricky more and more every day. What else you got, Tom?
So along that sort of oversharing line, this is a rule, an OSHA rule that's going into effect on January 1. So for all the listeners out there, keep this in mind, but the record keeping rule is changing slightly. You may all be aware that every year you have to submit your 300A logs. If you're basically an employer who has 20 or more employees, you have to submit your 300A logs to OSHA electronically. And we might ask, well, what's a 300A log? That is a summary of all the workplace injury and illnesses that occurred for the year. And OSHA uses that information to sort of target areas of industry or target types of injuries as part of their inspections. This is where we get information to form national emphasis programs or local emphasis programs, like you might see a forklift emphasis program, based on the fact that there were a lot of forklifts type injuries that occurred that were reported on these logs. Now, under the Biden administration, they've sort of resurrected an old Obama rule. And that Obama rule was essentially, we want you to provide more than just the 300A. We want your 300s, which itemize and list every recorded injury or illness that you have. And it gives a little narrative about each one, and the 301 forms. And the 301 forms are called the incident forms. And so for each injury that you have that is recorded, you have to fill out a 301 form, which identifies the person, type of injury, what happened, and it gives a lot more detail. Now, for certain employers, they're going to have to provide all three of those. Not every employer, but certain employers. And these are all identified in the rule by appendices. So Appendix A says these are the people who have to submit their 300A log. The problem is Appendix A is basically everyone. So it's kind of a catch-all. But for 300, for your 300 and 301 forms, that's going to be covered by the people in Appendix B. And Appendix B is much more narrow. It sort of carved out the big industries, so construction, healthcare, certain types of manufacturing, utilities. So some of the bigger corporations, and oftentimes the areas where we're having a lot more exposure to safety issues, those are companies that are going to be carved out. So they're not going to be a part of that. But
they're going to be exempt from doing that.
That's right. And there's a smaller subset here. And basically, Appendix B covers those with a total case rate of 3.5 or less, or cases of, basically 3.5 cases per 100 employees. So a lower rate. And I think the impetus behind that is, if they were going to try to get these big employers, these high rate injury areas to submit these, it never would have gotten through the rulemaking process. So This is a way to get that through. But that's going to be in effect January 1st. And we typically submit those logs sometime in mid to end February of the next year. So you're going to be submitting your logs sometime February, early March of 2024 for 23.
So Tom, did I hear you say if you have an injury rate of 3.5 or less, then you may be subject to it? So the better your rate, the more subject you are to reporting?
So it's kind of inverse, actually. And part of that, I think, is the way that they're sort of, scaling back that rule a little bit, because I just don't think that these big industries like healthcare, construction, manufacturing, those trade associations would not have allowed this. There would have been a lot of heavy campaigning, and I think there was, to exclude them from that. So the idea and the purpose behind this would be, it provides OSHA with a little bit more particularized information. It allows them to sort of target certain areas of work that they think have higher rates or are more susceptible to injuries. And that allows them to perform, develop their programs, their emphasis programs, whether they're on a national level or a local level, that sort of guide those inspections.
All right. And the last question, Tom, is where would I find out? I know you kind of pointed to it, but does Ogletree have a resource, or is there a place that's easy for me to go to determine, am I subject to reporting this in January or not?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Phil. Ogletree's got those resources. You can find it easily on the OSHA's website. Under their website, you can even search up, a record keeping rule, and you'll be able to find this and get the appendices out. This is I will say that we at Ogletree have this product called the OSHA tracker. It's free. You can go on the website and look at it, and it'll break down all sorts of information for you. Basically, where what kind of industries have higher inspection rates, how many inspections are going on, how many citations have been issued. It's a wonderful resource, and I use it on a daily basis when I'm sort of projecting trends and identifying areas to be more mindful of. But yeah, that's all out there. It's all publicly available. You go to OSHA's site to get the appendices, and you can go to Ogletree's site to get all that information.
Sounds great. All right, Tom, I appreciate it. It's always great to have you on the program.
Thank you once again for tuning in to This Week at Work. If you enjoy the show, please share it with your colleagues. Forward our invites. Share the link aimea.org/thisweekatwork, or follow or subscribe wherever you get your news and entertainment, like LinkedIn, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. We're everywhere you are. And you can be part of the show. Send your questions and comments anytime to info@thisweek.work. We'll see you next week, 7:30 a.m. Central Time, when we discuss what's happening this week at work.